Starting a PhD has got to be one of the most exciting periods in a person's life. You, as a new PhD, are beginning an intellectual journey to explore important questions to which the world needs answers. You're on your way to discover new knowledge, new technologies, new ideas that can help make the world a better place, and you're getting paid to do it. But it is a job with very high stakes. By definition, a PhD is designed to explore topics about which little is known. As the former US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, famously said, there are known knowns. These are the things we know that we know. There are known unknowns. These are the things we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. These are the things we don't know that we don't know. As a PhD, you'll probably find yourself working both with known unknowns and unknown unknowns. That's not easy. And there's no path here. There's no established way. You have to find your way. Fortunately, you have a guide, your PhD supervisor. Welcome to Science Conversations. I'm Nancy Bazilchuk, host of the 63 Degrees North podcast from NTNU's Communication Division. And today we're going to look at what it takes to jumpstart your career. We'll look at topics like, how do you develop a good relationship with your supervisor? How do you maintain a good work-life balance when you feel stressed from a heavy workload or the pressure to perform? How do you build networks, both here in Norway and internationally? And what do you do if your research project runs into trouble? Or if there's a mismatch between you and your supervisor? Today, I have two experienced researchers on my panel to share their many years of helping today's PhDs become tomorrow's superstar researchers. First, let me welcome our panelists, Professor Magnar Bjørås from the Department of Clinical and Molecular Medicine at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and Professor Astrid Devine from the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering and the Faculty of Engineering. And unfortunately, we had a third panelist, Lars Wikström from the Department of Psychology and the Faculty of Social and Educational Sciences, but he sadly got sick, so he couldn't come today. So actually, before we start, I thought it would be helpful if we hear a little bit about your fields of research. I'd like to start with you, Astrid.
Yeah, so I work with material science, applied material science, and in my group we study and we model transport and degradation in materials. So it's kind of on the border between physics and engineering.
Okay, and Magnar?
Yeah, so I'm what we call a molecular biologist. So my core interest is DNA and RNA, and to understand how we maintain the DNA to have a healthy life, and also to understand what happens when you get sick or when you get a disease, and the impact of maintaining DNA or when it's failing.
And some people may know you from a little work you did with COVID. Could you just tell us one little sentence about that?
Yeah, we had a very good effort, should I say, and collaboration between different departments at NTNU and St. Olav, where we, in a very short time, developed a test for COVID-19. And that was in response to the lack of reagents to do that testing in Norway. And that turned out to be the most used COVID test in Norway during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was quite an impressive experience to watch it happen in real time, since we all experienced it. So a lot, I think, of when you're trying to get your career started as a PhD, you as a PhD are going to try to do the best you can. But a lot, I think, also depends upon how you are welcomed into your department. So I thought I would ask you to maybe describe from your two different departments, how do you have any special programs for welcoming PhDs? And not just like, here's your ID card and there's where the coffee machine is, but more along the social or I don't know. Why don't we start with you, Astrid?
So the department has a buddy program where everybody who arrives gets a buddy to help show them around, and I also do this in my group. I make sure that when somebody is arriving, that they have contact with other group members already before, that they can ask for basic help or information about how things happen in Norway or in Trondheim.
Yeah. And you, Magnar?
Yeah, I mean, same thing at our department. I mean, the administration takes the first part, so they get thoroughly into routines and the regulation at the department, and then it goes into the groups and to the supervisors. And it's not that we have a fixed program, but of course to get to learn the people. That's important. To learn about the other projects is important, and to also emphasize the importance of the social interaction.
Yeah, how much do you try to organize social activities, or do you just do the PhDs themselves take the initiative, or it probably varies?
So it depends on what people need. Some people have, if they have studied here, they have their whole social life already. But we do try to have some social activities in the groups, and within my group is part of the materials group, and we have social activities in the materials group, and we try to organize seminars, regular seminars, where somebody gives a presentation about their work, and the others then people meet each other that way, and they learn about each other's work.
How many PhDs do you supervise right now?
3.
3, and you, Magnar?
I have 8. PhD students in my group, but I have project leaders within the group that take main responsibilities. For the supervision, although I'm formally the main supervisor.
Huh. So when we were chatting before this started, Astrid, you said you had a little piece of advice for your PhD.
Yeah, so I tend to tell them stories for my own PhD and the things that I did that were maybe not so smart, such as it took me a long time to get going in the beginning, and so I don't do what I did, do better, learn from my mistakes.
Do you try to tell your PhDs like some common pitfalls or issues that they should watch out for?
Yeah, I think that's very important that I mean, when you meet, you are enthusiastic, and you took this job because you are enthusiastic about the project. You are also probably enthusiastic about the environment. But of course, there are ups and downs, and you might meet challenges, and it's very important to talk about that those issues might come up during the course of your PhD, and so. But that could be friction between supervisor and the candidate. It could be friction between him and the project group. And there could be also that you lose motivation and how you face it. And that you get a trustful relationship between the team and the candidate. That's extremely important.
Another thing we were talking about before we started the seminar here was how much, if any, is there a difference for PhDs coming from outside of Norway in terms of really getting their career going versus students master students who are Norwegian and then go on into the existing system? Can maybe Astrid talk a little bit about that?
I think there are some issues that are unique to people coming from abroad that arrive here, don't know anybody, don't know the system, but many of the pitfalls in like having a conflict with your supervisor, or losing motivation, or just getting stuck and not making any progress for a while. These are things that happen regardless of where the people came from. And so I think that the kind of support that they then need is actually very similar. They just need to understand that. Yeah.
There's one. I mean, there are differences probably then from. Depending on the countries, because Norway have a relatively flat structure, but there are of course other places where they have a more hierarchical structure. So I think sometimes students may be a bit surprised about that the relationship between supervisor and student is different. I think for Europe it's more or less the same, but if you go to Asia, it's probably a bit different.
Much more hierarchical.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I found myself wondering, I mean, it's a beautiful sunny day out there, even though we're in a studio, but I wonder if, particularly for international students, if you have noticed any people reacting to the weather, because Norway can be quite challenging.
Yeah, I think for people, they need to understand before they come. I usually have this conversation with them actually during the application process. I tell them like it's really dark here in the winter and really cold and can be quite nasty weather. Like November is not the funnest month.
No.
And so I talk to them. They know that this is coming, and then of course we help. Like I tell them, buy one of these daylight lamps. So that they can yeah. So try to give people some extra support when you know that they are gonna probably be a little bit shocked by that. But so far, all of my PhD students and postdocs have managed to deal with this pretty well.
Yeah. Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I also, the first year is the worst one to experience the dark time of the year. And I used to say I usually prefer to get students in springtime or in summertime, to get the students that have never experienced the winter time when it comes in November. That can be a quite rough experience actually. And then I think it's like Astrid said, it's important to watch up actually to make them aware of, and also for the supervisors to follow if you can see that the mood and
that they're struggling a little bit with.
Yeah. Mm.
If you had to, I mean, you've worked with a lot of PhDs, you've supervised PhDs. If you had to sort of describe characteristics that you have seen in your PhDs that have helped them succeed, what would you name? What would you say?
So I would say curiosity. This is really, because it helps keep you motivated if you want to understand how stuff works. Curiosity for your project, but curiosity in general. The search for the truth keeps you motivated. Mm. I think that's a really really important.
Yeah, I think the genuine interest is extremely important because you really need to enjoy it, to have fun, and you need a strong motivation. You shouldn't go into a PhD if you do that because you didn't get another job.
Right, because...
Yeah, and you will do much better if you're curious about it, because that's the whole thing, is to try to figure out how stuff works. And if you're not really interested in that and just going through the motions because your supervisor told you to do this, then you will never do the follow-up. You will not become independent in the same way that somebody who is really curious will be.
And when you ask about characteristics, I mean, in our field, where we do experimental projects, and you need multidisciplinary teams, then you need to collaborate with people. So to be a team worker for at least most of the projects in our field is extremely important. And I should also say, because of all the ups and downs, you should show endurance and disciplines, because there will be tough periods of time. So if you have that skills before, that's good.
What do you say to a student who comes to you and says, "Oh, I've just lost my mojo. You know, I just can't. I've lost my motivation." How do you handle that? That's a hard one, I think.
You have to figure out why they have lost their motivation. If this is something that has to do with a project, like there's some aspect of the project that has become boring to them, or there's something they were hoping to do that they haven't gotten a chance to do, if you can maybe redirect the project, or if you're very lucky and the project is very free, you can maybe move it in a very different direction.
No, I totally agree. I mean, you need to maybe you have done something wrong from the beginning, and it's back to one of your earlier questions, that you need to talk about what is the challenging part of this. And the supervisor might be busy, so at least you need a team and a co-supervisor, someone which is with you in the lab every day. And because There might be as simple that you need to change the direction of the project. It could also be that what you planned in the beginning, that the technology or the methods that particular person were asked to develop, or it doesn't fit to that person.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's also, as a supervisor, very important to look at what do the student actually enjoy most. And you might actually change the direction of your project based on the skills of the student. And that is sometimes something you don't know, at least if it's a completely new student, that you have to change the direction. And that could be a benefit for the project as well. Although you go maybe a bit aside what was the original plan.
Yeah, I think for the students it's very motivating. They have some control also. So you ask them, what do you want? And this just having the input into their project creates a lot of motivation. So they have more control over. They're just not just like doing what you tell them to do. They actually have their own voice in it. I think that gives a lot of motivation.
And that is about giving ownership. I mean, a PhD student, the main purpose of a PhD is to learn to be independently thinking. So you should know how to, at least how to lead a project. And to do that, you need to take ownership into things. And of course, it's not that that project necessarily is that student's only property.
Right.
I mean, it's a team, and that you have the team feeling, but you also have an ownership to this team effort.
Yeah, but it's easy to see that maybe, at least for some students, they might feel like, oh, I don't want to trouble my supervisor about this little thing. You know, you can imagine, especially if you're new to Norway, and maybe, like you say, this flat structure, it's very, it may feel uncomfortable or foreign. So how do you promote this dialogue?
Well, when I tell them the stories about my own PhD, for example, and I tell them about the stuff that I did wrong or that I could have, like, not just for my PhD, but for my whole career, then because I do stupid things, they feel more, at least I hope they do, that they feel more that they can tell me their own things, that they feel like, okay, maybe I should be more motivated, but okay, I'm not, so maybe I should tell Astrid about it. And if they feel that I tell them about my failings, then they will be more... So
you're more like...
Yeah, I'm trying to be open about my own weaknesses and my own mistakes, so that they will not feel so like that they have to make themselves look better than they really are.
I agree. I think that, again, back to this initial talk, that you really make them aware of that. You can please tell me about the experiments that failed, or the experiments that didn't really fail, but which have a negative results. Because what I think many students think that they did something wrong, even when they didn't do something wrong, because you have a hypothesis and you try to test the hypothesis and it fails. And it's maybe 1 out of 10 hypotheses that turns out to be right.
Right. So that's another thing, I guess, is just making sure that the student is, or the PhD is aware of, yes, it gets back to this idea of the unknown. We're asking these questions for which there really aren't any.
We don't know the answers.
We don't know, and so maybe we're trying to ask the question in the wrong way, and there's no.
I think this is really a key point, because the transition from being a bachelor or master students, where you read textbooks, you take for granted that this is more or less the truth, but it's actually relative truth. Our research is to break down paradigms and also to rewrite the truth in a way, or get closer to the truth. And I think this is really a change in mindset, because when you do the ordinary study, you are so used to, you read your part, you get it done, and it's done properly. When you start to do research, this is changing. You can have half a year of miserable experiments.
In the education up to that point, there's usually a nice, clean correct answer to the problems. And once you start doing research, everything is messy. Maybe you learn, maybe you figure something out, maybe you don't, and maybe we asked the wrong question or we asked the wrong system the question. So there is a lot more uncertainty, and that means a lot of more room for going down the wrong path, and you have to be able to understand. They have to be able to understand. We have to explain this to them very clearly, that it can go wrong, can be that you haven't achieved anything after 2 months. And this this is why they need to be resilient, but also that's the curiosity. When you go down this wrong path, you still learn something, and that's still worthwhile.
Yeah. So if a PhD is watching and thinking, oh, how do I really, what do I need to have to sort of make my career jumpstart? It sounds like basically a willingness to fail.
I think to some extent, at least, you should plan some experiments which you know is more straightforward, and where you know that you may have a likeliness of succeeding answering the questions in a short time. I think that is because this is also a stressful thing with the PhD, is that it's 3 years, and you have the courses, and you have to time all this. So to have some safe sub-projects, I think that's a very wise
it sounds
advice.
like a good...
But I think it's important for PhDs to understand that you have these textbooks that took decades, centuries, for all this knowledge to be accumulated. And now you're doing your PhD, and if you do it really well and you're really lucky, in 100 years you will be one sentence in another textbook. So you have to also have some humility and understand that we are on this edge where we have to struggle to find the truth. But,
I think to emphasize that you can fill in one brick in a gigantic puzzle, and that's what you do. And if you see yourself in that context, it makes a lot of sense to be in science.
But also to realize what you have the possibility to get that puzzle piece. But everybody maybe would love to be Albert Einstein, but it's mostly working at the very fringe of science and trying to find the truth out there of your piece in the puzzle.
But also people like that who make these fantastic discoveries, they are not operating in a vacuum. They are surrounded by a lot of other scientists who have made smaller contributions for them to stand on. So even if your contribution is small now, doesn't mean it won't have an impact later, even an impact that you never realize. But it contributes to the whole building. Could be that it's a brick somewhere in the foundation that was actually really important.
So we've talked a little bit about how a PhD should have some patience and humility and resilience. Are there things out there? Are there other stumbling blocks or challenges that we can sort of alert our early career researchers and PhDs that they should be on the lookout for, to be aware that it's a universal experience?
I think it's maybe something we will come back to later, but I think at a very early stage to start to discuss what has happened after the PhD.
Yes, I do want to talk about that.
But I think that is also a part of it, that because if you start to talk about that, because I think, at least when I was a young student, it was like the golden standard. That was to be a very good independent research scientist in fundamental research. But there are so many other opportunities. And I think that also brings more perspectives into your PhD study.
Interesting thought. Astrid, do you have?
I think something which bothers many PhD students, especially in the beginning, is that there's not enough being produced yet. You don't have a lot of results. You're stuck. Maybe you've been stuck with the same problem for a long time, and this is all PhD students struggle with this. but they feel very lonely sitting there hearing their colleagues talk about their interesting experiments or their but everybody has been there.
Yeah.
And that's a really
that's
important,
a really
important
key thing to think.
Key thing to realize that you're not alone in that. It's if we knew exactly what to do, PhD would take half a year.
Yeah.
or even if you could just write that one line that's going into that textbook and be done with it. But that's not.
It's again back to this that the PhD students are individual. To find a template, that is not easy, and it's good that there is no template for how to educate PhD students. They are individual. So I think that as young group leaders, often they want to push them through a certain path, which is also based on what the previous supervisors did wrong. And I think that's something that maybe younger supervisors, they are too strict about how a PhD path should look.
Right.
So this to change and look at your PhD student and see and find out what is his good skills. Even talk about him that why are you so negative to those this sub project, and sometimes I realize at least that person is not that motivated for that type of experimental work.
So then what do?
I try to change to another path, and we talk, and then you might have in the meantime notice that this person really likes to do something a bit different, which is still within the scope of the project, and then you might ask someone else to do that part, which could be a staff scientist or a staff engineer. But of course that requires again that you have a team. And that might be a challenge for many.
I think this
leaders.
also requires really good communication between the supervisor and the PhD candidate, because everybody has their weaknesses and their strengths, and if you know what the students' weaknesses and strengths are, then you can play to those with the project. And it's also good if they know what your weaknesses and strengths are, because then they know what they can use you for really effectively and what is going to be more problematic.
Yeah, but although I do think that, again, it can be intimidating to say to your supervisor, I really hate working with these pipettes, or, I hate working with that PCR machine that's named Fred. It just seems like it could be rough.
There is always negotiations. There is not that they can choose whatever they want. There is a framework here, and but I think that to show some flexibility in this respect is important. Of course, if the motivation is that you have just realized that PhD is not what you want to do, whatever you want to do afterwards, then at the end of the day you might decide that you quit.
Yeah.
But of course you don't want to go that far. I just say that there are many opportunities to change the path, so you get the students on the right track.
Yeah.
Yeah, and go ahead.
This also depends on the flexibility of the supervisor. I mean, we're talking from our point of view, but maybe not every supervisor is as flexible, or maybe they have very specific goals with the project that they actually really have to meet.
Yeah.
So it can depend also on the project and the supervisor, how much freedom you have there.
Yeah. And I see for many students, they are very stressed by the fact that you have all these courses that they need to fulfill. Yeah. And that breaks up their experimental work, or what is the actually real task, even if not experimental work. And that is a very stressful part of the PhD program, which I don't like it myself either. I don't think it's the right thing, the right way to do it. But then we are in opposition, of course, to what is the current program.
Yeah, but I agree with you on that. I also think the coursework is too much. It becomes very stressful, and you can. I make a PhD course for my students that is very relevant for what they need to learn. But it's one course, and then they have to do 3 more. So finding enough courses that are actually relevant to save them some time for their research is difficult. Yeah. So they can be. I find that the coursework can be really disruptive to the PhD, to the research part of the PhD.
Yeah. Because remember, you have 3 years.
Right.
you are supposed to solve a research task. And to be a researcher when you are finished with your PhD is not to take courses. You learn to find the information in the literature that you need. And it's to think that you find courses which is relevant for all these PhDs is unrealistic. And I say that you have gone at school for maybe 15, 16, 17 years. And now it's time to move on. Now you are searching for the knowledge. It might be much better to go to another lab to learn something instead of sitting writing. And that's also a change of mindset, because when you're finished as a master student, you think you can read and learn everything by reading.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is unfortunately something that we can't control, and probably we should probably leave it there, I think, since we don't have anybody from the administration to defend the policy.
But they are listening to us. So
yeah, so it's our opportunity to...
There is not that I'm against the administration in this, but it's really a challenge, because the goal is to do as good research as possible and to educate as good people as possible.
Yeah.
And we say this based on our experience as relatively successful in research.
I get that.
Yeah, I think it's important for when you do a course, a master level course, then all the information is kind of readily is available and is pre-processed for the students to absorb. And the whole point of absorbing information when you're doing research is that it's not pre-processed. You have to figure out what is important, what is not important. And that's a skill that they need to learn. And they don't really learn that from doing more courses.
I was going to, one thing I wanted to do while we talk today is we do actually have a video from NTNU's Occupational Health Services where they talk about some of the services that are available for PhD students, well, all employees and students who maybe have stress because they have a lot of coursework, or have stress because they feel like they're not achieving enough. So I don't know if the men in the control panel can run our little video for us.
Bedriftshelsetjenesten, NTNU's Occupational Health Service, assists all employees and managers in working environment matters, and we aim at creating healthy and safe working conditions. We are health professionals, and we are a neutral party giving aid and advice to the case. You don't need permission from your supervisor or your manager to contact us. The most common inquiries PhDs have are related to stress, loss of motivation, minor mental health issues, communication problems, or conflict-related matter. We can also assist with illness and sick leave follow-up, and give advice in drug and addiction issues and general work environment-related challenges. We do not offer psychological therapy, so in cases where that may be required, we can give advice on whom to contact further. You can be sure that your information stays safe, as we have a duty of confidentiality. You are welcome to contact us at the Occupational Health Service at any time.
We've now talked a lot about different ways to handle tough situations, encouraging conversation, making sure that there's a supportive network. Are there any stories that you might be able to tell about a situation where something maybe went wrong, and then how you and your PhD resolved the issue?
So my PhD is a kind of a, I have adopted 2 PhD students who had lost their supervisor during their PhDs. And yeah, that's a very big challenge for them. So they were not my PhD when this happened, but they became my PhDs after. And then you end up with a project that you're not super familiar with all the ins and outs and all the details. So in the second case, this PhD student, he was close to the end, but he still had some science to do. He still had a lot of writing up to do. And I knew that I could not support him in the way that one normally wants to support a PhD student at that stage. So we had a discussion about this. What can I do to help you? What do you need? And we made a deal that he would basically have he would become really independent really quickly, and I would read everything he gave me really quickly and try to, so we really made a deal on how to handle this as well as possible. So, and we involved somebody from outside who was more familiar with the context of his field. So then together we managed he managed to finish.
Good.
So I was really happy that he really stepped up also.
Any
I think
war stories?
I think it's the same issues that you bring up, that this to bring in others that might fill in something which you are lacking, or even if there is a problem with the chemistry. Yeah. And that you move that people to another project, or you even try to decrease your involvement in that. I think that is, if you manage to do that and realize that also as a supervisor, it's good. So there are, again, I think this to have a broad network or teamwork, and that at the department there are many people and someone work with related things and so on. There are don't be ashamed that the relationship between the student and the supervisor doesn't work, even after trying several times.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of...
This is like in life in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, I didn't know enough about the field that he was working in. I could understand his methods, but I didn't know his field very well, the context. So I could only support him by finding... I could check that he had done his research correctly, but I couldn't check that it was very relevant. Right. So I needed support from that on that from outside, and we figured out together who to ask and how to handle this. But I think that at this point it was really important that we talked about this very openly. That I would not know these things, and that we had to find someone else to rely on for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I don't know, having not done a PhD, but I think that impresses me that there's both this huge community at NTNU, but also this international community. You all have ties with various researchers with whom you've worked in various ways, collaborated maybe, or written papers together, or contacted each other. How are you able to help your PhD students, or how can your PhD students make sure that they build those networks outside of Norway in particular?
Again, it comes to the individual and what the PhD student is planning after the PhD, because that's also something we haven't touched upon, is that fundamental research is one thing, innovation, and if you want to go in a commercial direction, is another thing. And that's why it's so important to talk about those things, because that is also decisive for who you put that student in contact with. And you want maybe then, if you see as a student that really want to do innovation, he don't want to do fundamental research after the PhD, then you can try to start an innovation path in that, and then you go to other people that you would do if it was to go for a more fundamental research path.
How about you, Astrid? So, in addition to this, I think something which PhD students can do themselves is to try to go to conferences. As soon as you have something to present, or even if you have just some stuff, but it's not really very mature yet, you can go to conferences, interact with other people, get feedback on it, get ideas, and you make connections that way with people who have similar interests, and it's also very motivating to see people are actually interested in what you're doing. Because sometimes it feels quite lonely. You're working on this thing, your colleague next door is working on some other project, you have your own project, and it's just you, maybe one or two other people, and when you're doing modeling work. And then going to a conference and seeing there are other people who are also interested in this, it can be really motivating for them. So I always really strongly encourage them to go to conferences, even if they are not interested in like a career in academia in the long run. They can still make connections and make friends and get motivation.
Or go to another lab for 2 weeks to learn some technology.
Yeah. Right.
And to get maybe exposed to an environment that you know or you think that this is good for that student.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as Magnar has pointed out several times, we have sort of sideways addressed this issue of how do you think in your PhD career? When and how do you think about life beyond a PhD? How do you formally talk to your PhD students about, like, oh, maybe you want to be a postdoc, or maybe you want to go invent a COVID-19 test? Or
I think that that's so important, and that's at least something I failed on when I was younger group leader. I didn't talk much about that because it's like, when I was a young student, the golden standard was to be in research, in hardcore fundamental research. And that was probably my motivation as well. But there are maybe 10–20% that will stay in that business.
Is it?
Maybe less.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be a consultant. You can go into big pharma or big industry. You can go into innovation teaching. There are so many opportunities, and I think that is important to talk about. And I think you can get back a lot of motivation if you start to talk about the student that get demotivated and which to some extent feel that, oh, is this hard work worth it?
Right. How about you, Astrid?
So I think that what they will do after is a good idea to think about, but I don't want them to stress about it too much while they're doing their PhD. So some of my PhD students, they know very clearly, I want to do this after, I want to go in this area, and then you can, during your PhD, you can already, because you know that they're going to want to do, and they're going to need these skills, you can try to help them get the skills that they need, the ticks on their CV for that. But I don't think it's something that we should stress them out about too much. They can change their minds during these 3 or 4 years, and they can.
Right, because I think it's probably in the beginning. It's really it's all so new, and you're all. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do when you're done?
That is a horrible question to ask. It's so stressful if you ask that.
I think that you should be focused on what you're doing, but you should understand that what you're doing is to learn to be an independently thinking researcher. That benefits you both and that makes you attractive, both for industry, for innovation, for consultants, for teaching. So it's more that the way you work as a scientist, that has a big value for a lot of disciplines or topics.
Yeah, I know my own daughter did a PhD in nanotechnology, as it happens, and she had her periods where, like, it can be quite a narrow field, but she's actually now working with life cycle analysis, because the ability, it's not just the specific research question that you tackle, but it's the ability to ask those questions, find answers, excuse me, manipulate data, understand how to move forward. Those are all skills that can be very, very widely applied. I see we're just out of time. Quickly, any parting thoughts?
You have fun. If you don't have fun when you're doing your PhD, it's not worth it. And it can be incredibly fun to discover new things, even small incremental steps forward. It's amazing. So
yeah, you're discovering something that no one else has known before. You'll be the first one to know this, to understand this, and that's like this is better than climbing Mount Everest, where 1,000 people have already been.
Yeah.
All right, well, just before we end, I just want to point out that NTNU does have a, excuse me, PhD handbook with lots of useful information. And I think with that, I'll say thank you both of you for a very interesting and fun conversation, because we had fun too. And thanks to our viewers for watching.